A city of wonders vanished beneath the sea in a single day and night. This is the story told by the philosopher Plato, a tale that has haunted our imagination for more than 2,000 years. But our quest today is not just to wonder if Atlantis was real. We are setting out to find where it could have been. This is an adventurous investigation, blending ancient history, modern geology, and enduring myth. By the end, you will have a complete map of the world's most compelling theories, from the Mediterranean to Antarctica. We will examine a lost city swallowed by an earthquake, a mysterious ring in the desert visible from space, and an island that disappeared outside Gibraltar. What does it say about us that we cannot let this sunken kingdom rest? Our entire search begins with two ancient texts. These are not dusty history books, but philosophical dialogues written by the Athenian thinker Plato around 360 years before the Common Era. The story of Atlantis appears in two of his works, Timaeus and Critias. It is presented not as a myth, but as a true historical account, a tale of a great power that once existed and then catastrophically fell. Plato attributes this story to a chain of telling. He says his own ancestor, the famous lawgiver Solon, traveled to Egypt and spoke with priests in the ancient city of Sais. These priests, guardians of records far older than any in Greece, told Solon of a mighty empire that existed 9,000 years before their time, an empire called Atlantis. Plato's description is remarkably detailed, almost like a blueprint for a lost world. He describes a great island, larger than Libya and Asia combined, located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, which we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar. At its heart was a magnificent capital city built in a series of concentric rings. Picture a bullseye. At the very center was a hill with a temple to the god Poseidon and the royal palace. Around this hill were 3 rings of water and 2 rings of land connected by bridges and tunnels. A great canal linked the outermost ring to the open sea. Beyond the city was a vast, fertile plain, perfectly rectangular and surrounded by a massive canal system for irrigation. To the north stood high mountains sheltering the plain from cold winds. This was a civilization of staggering wealth and advancement. They built grand temples, palaces, and harbors. Their society was organized and powerful, with a large army and navy that once threatened the ancient world. And they possessed a mysterious metal more precious than gold to them called orichalcum. Plato describes it as gleaming with a fiery red light mined from the earth and used to cover walls and pillars. The entire account is filled with these specific, tangible details, which is precisely what makes it so tantalizing. It feels less like a vague legend and more like a report. This vivid description in Timaeus and Critias is the sole historical starting point, the original seed from which 2 millennia of speculation have grown. Every theory we will explore must in some way grapple with Plato's words. Plato gave us one seemingly unambiguous landmark, the Pillars of Heracles. For any ancient Greek, this was not a mystery. It meant the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrow passage between the Rock of Gibraltar and the mountains of North Africa, the gateway from the familiar Mediterranean to the vast, terrifying Atlantic Ocean. When Plato writes that Atlantis lay beyond these pillars, the logical conclusion is inescapable. He is placing this lost empire out there in the great ocean that bears its name. This single line has launched 1,000 ships of thought, directing the classical search for Atlantis squarely into the Atlantic. It suggests a continent-sized island that once bridged the gap between Europe and the Americas, a plausible home for an advanced civilization that later sank, leaving only scattered islands like the Azores as its mountain peaks. The idea feels geographically neat, almost perfect, but here is where we must pause and ask a crucial question. Was Plato being literal, or was he using the known world's ultimate boundary as a storytelling device? The Pillars of Heracles were more than just a geographic location. They were a cultural symbol. They represented the edge of the known, the limit of safe navigation. To say something was beyond them was to say it existed in the realm of the monstrous, the mythical, the utterly other. It was the ancient equivalent of saying beyond the edge of the map. Could Plato have been using this powerful symbol to indicate a place far away and long lost, rather than giving GPS coordinates? Furthermore, we must consider the possibility of error or reinterpretation. Ancient geographical knowledge was not the precise science we have today. It was a patchwork of sailors' tales, merchant routes, and philosophical speculation. Is it possible that a story passed down from Egyptian priests over 9,000 years, as Plato claims, could have had its landmarks shifted? Could the pillars referred to in the original tale have been a different narrow passage, perhaps in the Black Sea or even at the mouth of the Nile, that later Greek listeners naturally mapped onto their own mental geography? This one clue is both the strongest anchor for the Atlantic theory and its greatest point of vulnerability. It forces us to decide, are we reading a historian's report or a philosopher's metaphor? The answer you choose will send your search in a completely different direction, either out into the deep ocean or circling back into the heart of the ancient world. This geographical puzzle leads us to one of the most compelling and widely accepted theories in the modern search for Atlantis. It does not point west into the Atlantic, but east into the sun-drenched Aegean Sea. Here we find a story of a real advanced civilization that met a sudden, catastrophic end, a story that echoes Plato's tale with uncanny precision. This is the Minoan hypothesis. The heart of this theory lies with a magnificent Bronze Age culture centered on the island of Crete, named the Minoans after their legendary king Minos. By around 2000 BC, they were the undisputed masters of the Mediterranean. They were not a warlike empire in the traditional sense, but a sophisticated, peaceful, and immensely wealthy trading power. Their great palaces, like the famous complex at Knossos, were sprawling, multi-story marvels with intricate plumbing, vibrant frescoes depicting dolphins and bull leapers, and vast storerooms filled with goods from across the known world. They possessed a powerful navy, a written language we still cannot fully decipher, and a culture that seemed, in many ways, more advanced than the contemporary civilizations of mainland Greece or Egypt. They were, by all accounts, a golden civilization that dominated the seas, and then they were gone. The catalyst for their collapse was a geological cataclysm of almost unimaginable scale. Just 70 miles north of Crete lies the volcanic island of Thera, what we now call Santorini. Around the year 1600 BC, Thera experienced one of the most violent volcanic eruptions in human history. It was a blast hundreds of times more powerful than the eruption of Mount St. Helens. The center of the island literally vanished, collapsing into the sea and creating the massive, water-filled caldera we see today, surrounded by the dramatic crescent cliffs of Santorini. The immediate effects were apocalyptic. A towering column of ash would have blotted out the sun across the entire eastern Mediterranean. Earthquakes would have rattled the region for days. But the most devastating weapon was the sea. The sudden collapse of the volcano into the ocean would have generated a colossal tsunami, a wall of water racing outward at incredible speed. Within an hour, this tsunami, estimated to be over 100 feet high, would have slammed into the northern coast of Crete. It would have scoured the coastline, obliterating the Minoan fleet, their source of power and wealth, flooding their coastal cities and farmlands with salt water and crippling their infrastructure in a single, horrifying blow. The ashfall that followed would have poisoned the soil and crippled agriculture for years. This was not a slow decline. It was a single day and night of destruction that shattered a civilization. The parallels to Plato's Atlantis are striking, an advanced seafaring culture with magnificent palaces, a sudden, catastrophic event linked to the sea. A civilization that essentially disappears from history, its memory preserved only in fragments and legends. Could the story of Atlantis be a distorted memory of this real disaster? The Egyptian priests Plato mentions would have known of the mighty Minoans, their trading partners. They would have witnessed, or at least heard detailed reports of, the cataclysm that ended them, the darkened skies, the failing harvests, the collapse of trade. Over centuries, as the story was retold, the specifics could have blurred. The island of Thera, which did literally sink into the sea, could have merged with the larger, more powerful civilization it destroyed on Crete. The timeline would have been stretched and the location moved beyond the familiar pillars to a more mythic setting. But the core of the story, a great power swallowed by the sea, remains intact. Visiting Santorini today, you stand on the edge of that vast caldera, looking down at the deep blue water where a mountain once was. You can walk through the ruins of Akrotiri, a Minoan town on Thera frozen in time by volcanic ash, its beautiful frescoes still vibrant. It feels less like a myth and more like an archaeological crime scene. This theory provides a tangible, evidence-backed foundation for the Atlantis legend. Yet, for all its compelling logic, it is not a perfect fit. Plato described an empire larger than Libya and Asia, which does not match Crete. He described a war with ancient Athens, for which there is no archaeological evidence from the Minoan period. The Minoan collapse, while sudden, was not a single, overnight vanishing act. Some of their outposts persisted for generations. So, is the Minoan hypothesis the solution, or is it another powerful echo of a truth that lies elsewhere? The sheer physical evidence for the Thera eruption is overwhelming. We can still see the caldera today, a gaping wound in the sea. We have dug up the ash-preserved town of Akrotiri, a snapshot of a sophisticated society frozen in a single moment. Geological cores from the seafloor and ice sheets in Greenland contain layers of volcanic ash that date precisely to that period, around 1600 BC. This was a global event, a year without a summer that would have been recorded by every civilization with a memory. For the Minoans on Crete, just 70 miles away, it was an existential catastrophe. Their fleet, docked along the northern coast, would have been utterly destroyed by the tsunami. Their ports and coastal farms were scoured by salt water. The ensuing ash fall poisoned their fields. This was not a slow fade, but a sudden, violent decapitation of a civilization. The timing, too, is provocative. Plato dated the fall of Atlantis to 9,000 years before Solon, which would place it around 9,600 BC, but many scholars argue this could be a misunderstanding. The Egyptian priests might have used a different calendrical system, or the number could have been symbolic for a very long time ago. If we compress that timeline, the collapse of Minoan power in the late Bronze Age aligns with a period of great cultural memory and the dawn of Greek history. The story of a great island power destroyed by the sea could easily have been passed down through traders and refugees, eventually reaching Egypt and centuries later the ears of Solon. The theory's greatest strength is that it provides a real, verified cataclysm that fits the core drama of Plato's story. It replaces pure myth with a historical tragedy. Yet, when we hold the map of the Minoan world against Plato's detailed description, the cracks begin to show. The first and most glaring mismatch is location. Plato was unequivocal. Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Heracles in the Atlantic Ocean. Thera and Crete are deep inside the Mediterranean in the Aegean Sea, a place well within the known world for ancient Greeks. Proponents of the Minoan theory argue that this detail was lost or altered as the story traveled, but it is a significant deviation from the source material. Then there is the matter of size. Plato described an island larger than Libya and Asia combined, a continent by ancient standards. Crete, while a sizable island, is not continent-sized, and the shattered remains of Thera are even smaller. Furthermore, Plato described the capital city of Atlantis as sinking beneath the waves in a single day and night. Thera did indeed sink, its center collapsing into the sea. But Crete, the heart of the Minoan civilization, did not sink. It was devastated, its power broken, but the island itself remained and was later inhabited by others. The Minoans were not erased from the earth, their culture was absorbed and transformed. Finally, Plato's narrative includes a great war between Atlantis and a prehistoric Athens, a detail for which there is no archaeological evidence in the Minoan period. The Minoans were primarily traders, not conquering invaders of mainland Greece in the way Plato describes. So what are we left with? The Minoan hypothesis is likely not a one-to-one match for Atlantis. Instead, it presents a powerful case for a kernel of truth. Think of a campfire story told over generations. The core event, a terrifying volcanic explosion and a tsunami that destroys a great seafaring culture, is real and traumatic. But as the story travels from Crete to Egypt and sits in temple archives for centuries, details morph. The location shifts to a more symbolic, distant place beyond the known world. The size inflates to match the grandeur of the disaster. The specific civilization becomes a generic, idealized superpower. The story absorbs other elements, perhaps even moral lessons about hubris that Plato wished to impart to his Athenian audience. The Minoan theory does not give us the literal Atlantis, but it gives us something perhaps more fascinating, a plausible historical catalyst for one of humanity's most enduring legends. It suggests that our oldest stories are often shadows cast by real, world-shattering events, distorted by time but rooted in a truth we are only now, millennia later, learning to decipher. This realization opens the door to a different kind of search, one that looks not for a perfect match, but for other echoes of that catastrophic truth in unexpected places. But what if the truth was not swallowed by the sea, but is instead hiding in plain sight, baked into the desert sands? Shift your gaze from the blue Aegean to the ochre expanse of the Sahara. Here, in the nation of Mauritania, lies one of the most striking geological features on Earth, visible from space. It is called the Richat structure, though you may know it by its more evocative nickname, the Eye of the Sahara. From orbit, it appears as a colossal, perfect bullseye, a series of concentric rings etched into the barren landscape over 30 miles wide. For decades, it was believed to be an impact crater, the scar from an ancient asteroid strike. But modern geology has revealed a different, slower story. This is not a wound from above, but a revelation from below. The Richat structure is a symmetrical anticline, a dome of layered rock that was pushed upward by tectonic forces millions of years ago. Over eons, wind and water eroded the softer layers, carving away the dome's top and leaving behind these dramatic, concentric ridges of harder rock. It is a natural sculpture of breathtaking scale and geometry. And for a growing number of modern Atlantis seekers, this is not just a geological curiosity. It is a perfect match for Plato's lost capital. The similarities, when you lay the satellite image next to the ancient text, are startling. Plato described a city built on a hill, surrounded by alternating rings of land and water. The Richat's central plateau and its concentric rings mirror that description with an almost uncanny precision. He wrote of mountains to the north sheltering a great plain. Look north of the Richat and you find the Atlas Mountains. He described a vast, rectangular plain to the south. South of the structure lies a remarkably flat basin known as the Tainsruft, which could have been a fertile plain in a distant, wetter climatic era. This theory places Atlantis not in the middle of the ocean, but on the northwestern edge of the African continent. Proponents argue this solves the "beyond the Pillars of Heracles" puzzle in a novel way. If the pillars were seen not as a gateway out of the Mediterranean, but as a boundary marker of the known Greek world, then a location in northwest Africa could indeed be considered beyond them from an Athenian perspective. Furthermore, geological studies have confirmed the area was not always a desert. During the African humid period, which ended around 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was a green savanna crisscrossed by rivers and lakes. The vast plains around the Richat could have been lush and fertile, capable of supporting a large civilization. Satellite imagery even reveals the ghostly outlines of ancient river channels snaking through the region, suggesting a landscape once shaped by significant water flow. Could these be the remnants of the grand canals Plato described? The idea is undeniably seductive. It offers a tangible, physical location you can visit today, a place whose very shape seems to shout the blueprint of Atlantis. Yet, for all its visual appeal, the Richat structure theory faces profound geological and archaeological challenges. The most significant is time. The process that formed the Richat's rings was not a sudden cataclysm, but an immensely slow erosion over many millions of years. The structure we see today was already ancient long before the first humans walked the earth. It was never a city that sank, it was always a rock formation being uncovered. There is also a complete absence of archaeological evidence. Despite its striking appearance, no excavations around the Richat have uncovered the ruins of a massive Bronze Age metropolis, no foundations of grand temples, no shards of pottery on a scale matching a capital city, no evidence of the advanced engineering or the mysterious metal orichalcum. The area shows signs of small, prehistoric human activity, but nothing resembling a pan-Mediterranean empire. So what are we seeing? The power of the Richat theory lies in pattern recognition, our human brain's desperate desire to see order and design in nature. It proves that Plato's description, whether based on a real place or a philosophical ideal, corresponds to a geological form that actually exists on our planet. This is perhaps its greatest contribution to the mystery. It demonstrates that the concentric ring city was not an architectural fantasy, but a layout that mirrors natural landforms. Could an ancient traveler have seen the Richat or a similar eroded dome, and its image have seeded the legend? Could a story from a green Sahara, passed down through generations as the desert claimed the land, have transformed a memory of a lost culture into the tale of a sunken ringed city? The Eye of the Sahara does not give us drowned pillars, but it forces us to look at the legend from a completely new angle, one where the sea that swallowed Atlantis was not water, but a sea of sand and time. The stark beauty of the Richat structure presents us with a difficult choice. We must decide if we are looking at the ruins of a city or the artwork of the planet itself. Geology speaks with a clear, if humbling, voice. The scientific consensus is unwavering. This is not the skeleton of a sunken capital, but a natural dome of layered sedimentary and igneous rock, uplifted and then meticulously carved by wind and water over a span of 100 million years. Each perfect ring represents a different stratum of ancient stone, a chapter in an epic written long before humanity. The idea that these concentric ridges are the remnants of artificial canals or walls collapses under this timescale. No human civilization, no matter how advanced, could have built upon a form that was still being sculpted deep in the age of dinosaurs. Yet the human mind is a relentless pattern seeker. Some researchers, like George S. Alexander, who has extensively studied and advocated for the site, point to specific features that seem to defy pure nature. They highlight what appear to be straight lines, right angles, and circular formations within the rings, suggesting possible remnants of foundations or plazas. Others point to geological studies that indicate the region experienced severe flooding in the distant past, which they interpret as evidence for the cataclysmic sinking Plato described. But here we enter the realm of interpretation. What one observer sees as a crumbled wall, a geologist identifies as a resistant layer of quartzite. What is framed as evidence of a great flood is to earth science the expected result of climatic shifts in the African humid period, when massive rivers did indeed flow where there is now only dust. The central challenge is one of proof or the profound lack of it. To validate the Richat as Atlantis, archaeologists would need to uncover indisputable evidence of large-scale, advanced human construction from the correct era. They would need to find the foundations of those grand bridges, the worked stone of the temple to Poseidon, or even a single artifact of the legendary orichalcum. So far, despite investigations, such evidence has not materialized. The area shows traces of sporadic human activity, stone tools, burial mounds, but nothing on the scale of a global empire's heart. Dating any potential human presence is also a maze. If a civilization thrived there during a green Sahara period and then fled or perished as the desert advanced, their traces would be scant, buried under shifting sands and incredibly difficult to pinpoint. This leads us to a more subtle and perhaps more compelling possibility. Let us set aside the question of whether the Richat was Atlantis. Instead, ask this: could this breathtaking natural wonder have inspired the legend? Imagine an ancient traveler, perhaps a Phoenician merchant or a Berber nomad, standing at the edge of this gargantuan, perfect bullseye in an otherwise featureless landscape. They would have had no concept of tectonic uplift or aeolian erosion. What they would have seen was a city of the gods, a place of impossible geometry, clearly designed by some immense intelligence. The story they carried home would not be a geological report, it would be a myth. That story, passed along trade routes, could have reached the Nile Delta. An Egyptian priest, hearing a tale of a magnificent ringed city in a distant land that was later consumed by the desert, might have translated swallowed by sand into swallowed by sea for an island-dwelling Greek like Solon. The legend, once seeded, would grow in the telling, absorbing moral lessons and historical conflations over centuries until it reached Plato's pen. In this light, the Richat structure is not a failed candidate but a profound clue. It shows us that the very blueprint of Atlantis, the concentric rings, exists in nature. It suggests that our oldest stories may not be records of lost cities, but magnificent echoes of lost landscapes, transformed by awe and memory into something even greater. From the endless sands of Africa, our search now plunges into the turquoise waters of the Caribbean. Here, the legend of Atlantis takes on a distinctly new world flavor, anchored by one of the ocean's most enduring mysteries, the Bimini Road. Just off the western coast of North Bimini Island in the Bahamas, lying in about 20 feet of clear water, is a formation that stops the heart of any dreamer. It appears to be a long, straight pavement made of massive, rectangular limestone blocks, some over 15 feet long. The stones are arranged in a deliberate-looking line that runs for nearly half a mile, bending at a perfect right angle at one point. To the eye, it looks uncannily like a sunken highway, a drowned causeway leading to nowhere. The immediate, thrilling thought is obvious. Could this be a fragment of a lost city, a piece of the fabled Atlantis finally revealed by the shifting sands? This discovery in the late 1960s sent shockwaves through the world of alternative archaeology, perfectly timed with a growing public fascination with ancient mysteries. The location seemed to fit a grand, speculative narrative. If a continent-sized Atlantis once existed in the mid-Atlantic, its westernmost reaches could have stretched toward the Americas. The Bimini Road, then, might be a remnant of that bridge, a piece of infrastructure from a time when the sea level was lower and land connected what are now scattered islands. Some theorists go even further, linking the site to a cataclysmic event. They propose that a comet or asteroid impact in the region around 12,000 years ago could have triggered a rapid rise in sea levels, swallowing coastal civilizations and leaving behind only these enigmatic, tumbled ruins. This idea attempts to marry Plato's sudden sinking with a real, global climatic shift at the end of the last ice age. But no discussion of Bimini and Atlantis is complete without the figure of Edgar Cayce. In the early 20th century, this American psychic gave hundreds of trance readings about the lost continent. He described Atlantis as a highly spiritual but ultimately corrupt civilization that sank in stages, with the final destruction occurring around 10,000 BC. Most intriguingly, he made a specific prediction. he stated that a portion of Atlantis would begin to re-emerge near the island of Bimini in the year 1968 or 69. The discovery of the Bimini Road in 1968, right on this prophetic schedule, was seen by his followers as miraculous confirmation. It transformed the site from a curious underwater feature into a destined pilgrimage point, fueling decades of expeditions hoping to find the rest of the sunken temples and crystal power sources Case described. The psychic's narrative provided a ready-made mythos, turning the Caribbean into the central stage for Atlantis's return. Yet, when geologists and marine archaeologists turn their tools to the Bimini Road, the story becomes far less mystical. The scientific consensus is that this is a stunning but entirely natural formation known as beach-rock. This type of limestone forms in the intertidal zone, where sand and shell fragments are cemented together by calcium carbonate, essentially creating a natural concrete. Over time, as sea levels rose after the last ice age, this cemented sheet fractured. The fracturing often occurs along straight lines and right angles due to the internal stress patterns within the rock. Later, the softer sediment beneath it eroded away, leaving the harder, rectangular-looking blocks perched on the seafloor, giving the profound illusion of human craftsmanship. The dating of the rock itself places its formation at only around 2,000 to 4,000 years old, far too young for any hypothetical Ice Age Atlantis. So we are left with another powerful dichotomy. On one side, a potent blend of psychic prophecy, tantalizing geometry, and a grand theory of transatlantic contact. On the other, a clear and sober geological explanation. The Bimini Road teaches us a crucial lesson in the search for lost worlds. Our desire to find order is so strong that we often see the blueprint before we see the stone. It underscores how a single, ambiguous site, when wrapped in a compelling narrative, can redirect an entire branch of the search, proving that the legend of Atlantis is as much shaped by our hopes as it is by any sunken truth. Yet the Atlantic Ocean refuses to surrender its claim so easily. Far from the Caribbean shallows, 1,000 miles off the coast of Portugal, a different kind of evidence rises from the deep. Here, the Azores archipelago pierces the ocean's surface, a scattering of 9 volcanic islands born from one of Earth's most dramatic features, the mid-Atlantic ridge. This underwater mountain range is the planet's great seam, where tectonic plates are slowly pulling apart and new ocean floor is born from volcanic fire. The Azores are not just islands, they are the highest peaks of a vast, submerged plateau that stretches for hundreds of miles. And for many, this is the true location of Atlantis, not a single island, but the last visible remnants of a sunken continent. The scale here is finally right. Plato's description of an island, larger than Libya and Asia combined, always seemed like impossible hyperbole. But if we consider not just the islands we see, but the entire Azores plateau beneath the waves, the picture changes. This submerged landmass is enormous, roughly the size of Spain. It is not a continent, but it is a significant piece of real estate that could have supported a substantial civilization during a period of lower sea levels. The theory posits that the plateau was once largely above water, a great island or a connected archipelago, with the current Azores as its towering, mountainous region. A cataclysmic event, perhaps linked to the intense volcanic and seismic activity of the ridge itself, could have caused a rapid subsidence, sinking the central plains and leaving only the highest peaks visible. This fits the poetic image of a proud civilization swallowed by the sea, with only the mountaintops remaining as lonely, green sentinels. But is there any sign that humans were ever there to be swallowed? This is where the search turns from geology to archaeology. For centuries, it was accepted history that the Azores were uninhabited when Portuguese sailors arrived in the 15th century. Recent discoveries, however, are challenging that narrative. Stone structures that appear to be ancient, possibly funerary in design, have been found on some islands. Soil analysis on the island of Pico has revealed unusual pollen and charcoal deposits that some researchers argue indicate human-caused fires centuries before Portuguese settlement. Most controversially, what appear to be cart ruts grooves cut into bedrock similar to those found in Malta have been photographed on the seafloor off the coast of one island, suggesting human activity when sea levels were lower. The debate is fierce. Mainstream archaeologists caution that the stone structures could be the remains of much later shepherd shelters. The pollen evidence could be from natural fires, and the underwater features could be entirely geological. They argue that no definitive artifacts, no pottery, no tools, no bones have been found to prove a pre-Portuguese human presence, yet the questions persist. If humans did reach the Azores thousands of years ago, who were they? Were they sailors from a lost Atlantic culture, or simply incredibly adventurous Neolithic explorers from Europe or Africa? And could their forgotten story have somehow filtered back to the ancient world, becoming the seed of the Atlantis legend? The final, and perhaps most daunting, question is geological. Could a landmass the size of the Azores Plateau sink rapidly in the kind of single day and night catastrophe Plato describes? Modern geology says such an event is highly unlikely. Tectonic subsidence is typically a slow process measured in millimeters per year. The plateau itself was formed by volcanic uplift, not by sudden collapse. While the region is seismically active and has experienced devastating earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, like the famous Cape Linhos eruption in the 1950s, these events reshape islands. They do not make continents vanish. A rapid sinking of that scale would require a mechanism we don't see in the geological record of the Atlantic, such as a catastrophic crustal collapse or a massive, instantaneous shift in the plate boundary. So we are left with a haunting possibility, but not a proven fact. The Azores Plateau provides the grand Atlantic-scale geography the story demands. It offers tantalizing, if disputed, hints that humans might have known these distant islands long before recorded history, but it cannot provide the conclusive sunken city or the mechanism for its swift demise. The mountains are there, but the empire beneath the waves remains a shadow. But the most literal interpretation of Plato's landmark might lie not in a distant ocean, but right at the doorstep. Just 12 miles west of the Strait of Gibraltar, beneath the choppy waters where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic, sits a drowned piece of land called Spartel Bank. Today, it is a shallow underwater plateau, its highest point lying about 100 feet below the surface. But during the last ice age, when global sea levels were nearly 400 feet lower, this was not a bank. It was an island, a substantial, habitable island standing sentinel directly outside the Pillars. This is the core of a compelling, science-driven hypothesis put forward by French geologist Jacques Collina-Gerard. His research paints a vivid picture of a lost landscape. Around 20,000 years ago, at the peak of the glacial period, Spartel was a large island, roughly the size of the Greek island of Crete. It was surrounded by smaller islands, forming a small archipelago guarding the Atlantic gateway. The climate would have been cooler, but the land was likely covered in vegetation with freshwater sources, and crucially, it was positioned along the migration routes of animals and potentially ancient humans. Then the world warmed. As the great ice sheets melted, sea levels began their relentless rise. Collina-Gerard's modeling suggests the flooding of Spartel was not a single, violent event, but a gradual yet inexorable process. However, the final stages of this drowning could have been remarkably swift. He proposes that between 12,000 and 11,000 years ago, the rising waters would have fragmented the main island into smaller islets before submerging them completely. For a prehistoric community living there, this would have been the end of their world, a slow-motion catastrophe culminating in the final, permanent disappearance of their home beneath the waves. The chronological alignment is what makes this theory resonate. Plato, through the Egyptian priests, dated the fall of Atlantis to around 9,000 years before Solon's time, which would place it around 11,600 years ago. The submergence of Spartel Bank fits squarely within that same millennia, the era geologists call the end of the Pleistocene. Here, at last, is a location that matches Plato's directions with pinpoint accuracy. Just beyond the Pillars of Heracles, not 1,000 miles into the Atlantic, not in the Aegean, but literally a stone's throw from the strait itself. A place ancient sailors might have known existed, a place whose disappearance could have been remembered in seafaring tales passed down through generations. The story of a great island that vanished outside the famous pillars would have a powerful geographic logic. Furthermore, the geography of a submerged bank fits the narrative of a sudden sinking. While the sea level rise was gradual globally, local topography can create dramatic effects. If the island had a relatively flat central plain surrounded by higher ground, the final inundation could have been rapid, with seawater breaching a final natural barrier and flooding the interior in a matter of years or even months, a blink of an eye in geological terms, easily remembered as a single catastrophic event. So does Spartel Bank solve the mystery? It provides an elegant, minimalist answer. It requires no lost continents, no advanced Bronze Age empires, no psychic predictions. It simply suggests that Plato's story could be a magnified memory of a very real geographical event, the drowning of a strategic island at the edge of the known world during a time of great climatic change. The legend could have grown from a kernel of truth, a fertile island that was there and then was not. Yet, the theory also highlights the gap between a drowned island and a lost civilization. No archaeological evidence has been found on the submerged bank to suggest it was ever home to a complex society, let alone a technologically advanced empire that could threaten ancient Athens. It might have been a seasonal hunting ground for Paleolithic peoples or completely uninhabited. The hypothesis gives us a plausible location and a plausible cataclysm, but it does not provide the grand cities, the armies, or the mysterious orichalcum. It offers a stage, but not the play. This brings us to a pivotal realization in our search. Perhaps we have been asking the wrong question. We keep looking for a place that matches every detail of Plato's rich description. But what if the description itself is a layered artifact, a story woven from multiple threads of memory? The idea of a lost island just beyond Gibraltar feels almost modest compared to the next theory. This one does not merely move Atlantis to a new location, it moves the entire Earth. We are going to the bottom of the world, to a place of unimaginable cold and ice, to consider the most radical proposal of all, that the ruins of Atlantis lie buried under 2 miles of Antarctic ice. This theory abandons conventional geography and history entirely, entering the realm of catastrophic geology. Its most famous proponent was an American professor named Charles Hapgood. In the 1950s, Hapgood developed a hypothesis he called Earth crustal displacement. He proposed that the Earth's outer crust is not permanently fixed to the molten mantle below. Instead, he suggested it could shift as a single, rigid shell over the planet's interior, much like the loose skin of an orange sliding around the fruit. According to Hapgood, a massive imbalance, perhaps caused by the buildup of ice at the poles, could trigger this entire crust to suddenly slip. The poles themselves would physically move to new locations, while continents would be dragged into different climate zones almost overnight. In this scenario, what is now the frozen continent of Antarctica was once located in a far more temperate latitude, free of ice and capable of supporting a thriving, advanced civilization. A sudden crustal displacement then wrenched it southward to its current polar position, where it rapidly froze over, entombing all evidence of that civilization under an impenetrable layer of ice. The cataclysm was global, explaining not only the fall of Atlantis, but also the sudden extinction of mammoths and other Pleistocene animals found flash frozen with tropical vegetation in their stomachs. It is a breathtakingly dramatic idea, offering a single, elegant solution to multiple ancient mysteries. the theory gained a powerful piece of alleged evidence from an ancient map. In 1929, historians in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace discovered a fragment of a world map drawn on gazelle skin by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis in 1513. The map shows coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the Eastern Americas with surprising, sometimes controversial, accuracy. But its most tantalizing feature is a landmass at the bottom, south of the Atlantic Ocean. Some researchers, looking at its shape, have claimed it depicts the northern coastline of Antarctica, and crucially, it shows this coastline without its present ice cap, with details that supposedly match subglacial topography only mapped by modern seismic surveys in the 20th century. If true, the Piri Reis map would be a cartographic miracle, preserving knowledge of an ice-free Antarctica from a pre-glacial era, knowledge that must have come from an impossibly ancient seafaring culture. For proponents, this is the smoking gun, a relic from the age of Atlantis itself. Yet, when subjected to scientific scrutiny, this entire edifice begins to fracture. The theory of Earth crustal displacement is rejected outright by modern geophysics. The forces required to move the entire crust in such a manner are not present. The Earth's lithosphere is not a single, loose shell, but a series of tectonic plates that move independently, driven by convection in the mantle. The concept of the entire crust slipping en masse is considered physically impossible given our understanding of planetary mechanics. Furthermore, the geological record of Antarctica itself tells a long, slow story of cooling and glaciation over tens of millions of years, not a sudden deep freeze 12,000 years ago. Ice core samples reveal a continuous climate history going back 800,000 years, with no evidence of a violent, recent relocation from a temperate zone. As for the Piri Reis map, mainstream scholars offer a more grounded interpretation. The mysterious southern landmass is far more likely a composite of speculative geography, perhaps blending the coast of South America with rumored Terra Australis, a hypothetical continent cartographers had long believed must exist to balance the landmasses of the north. The apparent accuracy, when compared to modern sub-ice topography, is seen as coincidental or the result of selective interpretation. There is also the profound practical problem of evidence. Even if an advanced civilization existed on a temperate Antarctica, finding proof is a near impossibility. The ice sheet that covers the continent is on average over a mile thick. It has built up layer by layer for millions of years. Any ruins would be crushed to powder under that immense, grinding weight, then buried under millennia of accumulated snow compressed into ice. The technology to explore such depths over a continent-sized area simply does not exist. The Antarctic theory, for all its epic scale, ultimately asks us to accept a geological mechanism that science denies, based on a map that historians dispute, to find a city that is physically unreachable. It is less a hypothesis and more a grand myth for the modern age, a reflection of our desire for lost worlds so profound they can only exist at the very edge of our maps and beneath the deepest ice. The Antarctic ice represents a boundary not just of geography but of plausibility. To find a more grounded, yet still transformative, flood we must look to a body of water much closer to the ancient world's heart. The Black Sea today is a vast saltwater expanse, but 7,600 years ago, according to a compelling geological theory, it was something entirely different, a freshwater lake lying hundreds of feet below the level of the world's oceans. This is the Black Sea flood hypothesis, and it offers a cataclysm that may have echoed through countless ancient stories. Two marine geologists, William Ryan and Walter Pittman, pieced together this scenario from seafloor cores and seismic data. They proposed that as the last ice age ended, melting glaciers filled the Mediterranean Sea, causing it to rise. For centuries, a natural dam of land, the Bosporus Sill, held that rising saltwater back from the lower freshwater lake. Then, around 5,600 BC, the Mediterranean finally overtopped its barrier. What happened next was not a gentle trickle but a cataclysmic breach. Seawater began pouring through the Bosporus Strait with the force of 200 Niagara Falls. It was a roaring, unstoppable torrent that would have advanced over the land at a mile a day, swallowing the coastal plain that ringed the ancient lake. The shoreline would have retreated relentlessly, sometimes as much as a mile in a single 24-hour period. For the Neolithic farming communities living along that fertile coast, this was the end of their world. Their villages, their fields, their entire way of life vanished beneath a rising wall of salt water they could not outrun. The flood would have persisted for months until the lake level rose to meet the sea, transforming a freshwater basin into the brackish sea we know today and submerging an area of land the size of Florida. The human impact is almost too vast to comprehend. Ryan and Pittman estimate that over 60,000 square miles of settled land were inundated. This was not an empty wilderness, but one of the cradles of early agriculture in Europe. A mass exodus of terrified refugees would have fled in all directions, carrying with them a singular, traumatic story: the day the sea rose and swallowed everything. It is easy to see how this story, told and retold over generations as these displaced peoples migrated into Europe, Anatolia, and the Middle East, could have become the seed for the great flood myths found in countless cultures. The most famous, of course, is the biblical story of Noah's Ark, but the echoes are found in Sumerian, Greek, and other ancient traditions. Could the story of Atlantis be another variation on this theme? A tale not of a single ark, but of a whole sophisticated society consumed by a sudden marine invasion. The timeline is provocative. Plato's date of 9,000 years before Solon is still far too old, but the 5,600 BC date of the flood sits squarely in humanity's age of memory, a time when complex societies were forming and myths were being born. The geography, however, is a harder fit. The Black Sea is about as far from the Atlantic Ocean as you can get within the Mediterranean sphere, yet consider the path of a story. Refugees from this catastrophe spreading into the Mediterranean world could have carried their flood narrative to Egypt. Over millennia, as the story was formalized by priests and then transmitted to Solon, the location could have been shifted to a more symbolic, distant setting beyond the Pillars, in the ocean that represented ultimate mystery. The fertile, drowned plain around the Black Sea could have been magnified into the great rectangular plain of Atlantis. The rapid, relentless advance of the saltwater could have been compressed into the poetic single day and night of misfortune. The theory does not give us a ringed city, but it provides a plausible, verified cataclysm of the exact kind that spawns legend. It grounds the myth not in a lost civilization's hubris, but in a shared human trauma, a real event so devastating it etched itself into our collective psyche. The Black Sea flood reminds us that sometimes the most powerful mysteries begin not with kings and crystals, but with the rising of the water and the desperate flight of farmers, a story so true it had to be told forever. Deep in the sun-baked earth of southern Spain lies a different kind of ghost, one made of gold and whispers. This is Tartessos, a kingdom that glittered with real, tangible wealth at the very edge of the ancient world, and its story intertwines with our search in a uniquely compelling way. While we have been chasing sunken continents and global floods, Tartessos offers something different, a historical civilization confirmed by archaeology that flourished and then vanished in a location and manner that Plato would have found deeply resonant. It emerged around the 9th century before the Common Era in the region we now call Andalusia, a land rich in rivers and most importantly in metals. The Tartessians were master miners and metallurgists, sitting atop some of the Mediterranean's most abundant deposits of silver, tin, and copper. Ancient Greek and Phoenician sources describe them with awe, speaking of a fabulously wealthy society ruled by a succession of kings engaging in prosperous trade with merchants from the east. They were not a myth, they were an economic powerhouse, and their capital was said to be a magnificent city at the mouth of the Guadalquivir River, crucially, look at a map. Tartessos was situated in southwestern Iberia, just inside the Strait of Gibraltar. For a Greek like Plato, writing in Athens, this was the region beyond the Pillars of Heracles. It was the farthest western reach of the known world, a land of mystery and immense riches. The parallels start to click into place. Plato described Atlantis as a rich, advanced society that traded widely. Tartessos was exactly that, famed for its silver and its sophisticated metalwork. He described a war that led to its downfall. Historical records suggest Tartessos eventually fell, possibly to conflict with the Carthaginians or through internal strife around the 6th century BC. Most strikingly, Plato wrote of a mysterious, gleaming metal called orichalcum. While we have never identified an alloy by that name, the Tartessians were renowned for a distinct golden-bronze alloy they used in their exquisite jewelry and ceremonial objects. Could the legend of orichalcum be a distorted memory of Tartessian metallurgical skill? The timeline, however, presents a fascinating twist. Tartessos faded from history around 500 years before Plato wrote his dialogues. This is not the vast gulf of 9,000 years he describes, but a recent, almost contemporary disappearance for an educated Athenian. Plato would have had access to stories about this lost kingdom of the far west. It was a fresh mystery, so we are faced with a tantalizing possibility. Did Plato take the historical template of a rich, advanced civilization that vanished near the Pillars and project it onto a mythic, prehistoric canvas to serve his philosophical lessons? He might have absorbed the core facts, a powerful, wealthy culture lost to time at the edge of the world, and then magnified its age, its size, and its fate, transforming a historical kingdom into a moral allegory about divine punishment and hubris. The archaeological evidence from sites like Cancho Rono reveals a complex society with unique art and architecture, but not a continent-spanning empire. Its end was likely political and gradual, not a single cataclysmic sinking. Yet, natural disasters may have played a role in its decline, as seismic activity and possible tsunamis are known in the region. The story of Tartessos proves that civilizations can indeed vanish, leaving behind only fragments and legends. It provides a solid, historical anchor point that feels closer to the truth than any sunken landmass. Perhaps Atlantis is not a place to be found, but a story to be decoded, a layered narrative where the recent shock of Tartessos' disappearance was woven together with older memories of Thera's eruption or the Black Sea flood, all wrapped in the timeless geometry of natural wonders like the Richat structure. Tartessos brings us back from the edge of pure myth, reminding us that the most powerful legends are often rooted in real, lost kingdoms whose true stories were just strange enough to become eternal. The memory of Tartessos still lingered in the air when Plato was a young man, but another city's fate would have struck with the force of a thunderclap. In the winter of 373 BC, the prosperous Greek city of Helike, a prominent member of the Aegean League, vanished. It was not a slow decline, but a single, terrifying night of destruction. A powerful earthquake struck the region, centered directly beneath the city. The ground liquefied and buildings collapsed. Then, as the survivors fled toward the coast for safety, the sea itself rushed in. A colossal tsunami, generated by the same seismic shock, swept over the land, dragging the entire city and its inhabitants into a churning abyss. By morning, Helike was gone, swallowed by the waters of the Corinthian Gulf. For days afterward, according to the historian Diodorus, the bronze statue of Poseidon, to whom the city was sacred, remained visible beneath the waves, its outstretched arm a haunting grave marker for a lost community. This was not ancient history for Plato. He was in his 50s when it happened, a philosopher at the height of his powers in Athens. The news would have traveled quickly, a shocking topic of conversation in the Agora. A powerful city dedicated to the god of the sea, punished and obliterated by the sea in a single night. The symbolism was unmistakable and terrifying. Could this real, contemporary tragedy be the raw material from which Plato forged his most famous myth? The parallels are too precise to ignore. Plato describes Atlantis as a mighty power that angered the gods and was swallowed by the sea in one day and night. Helice suffered that exact fate. Plato places a great temple to Poseidon at the heart of Atlantis. Helice was a major cult center for Poseidon, even hosting a celebrated festival in his honor. The story of Helice provided a perfect, real-world template for a cautionary tale about divine retribution. But Plato was not a journalist, he was a philosopher. He would not have simply reported the event. Instead, he could have taken this shocking, verified disaster and projected it onto a grand, prehistoric canvas. He magnified Helice into a continent-spanning empire. He moved its location from the familiar Corinthian Gulf to the symbolic edge of the world beyond the Pillars of Heracles. He stretched its timeline back 9,000 years, giving it the weight of primordial antiquity. In doing so, he transformed a local catastrophe into a universal parable. The story was no longer about one city's fate, but about the inevitable downfall of any civilization that succumbs to pride, corruption, and moral decay. Atlantis becomes a philosophical weapon, a story designed to warn his fellow Athenians about their own imperial ambitions and spiritual failings. The recent, visceral horror of Helice gave the allegory its emotional power and its chilling sense of immediacy. When his audience heard of a city dedicated to Poseidon sinking beneath the waves, they would have felt a cold shiver of recognition. The theory is compelling because it connects the dots between a known historical event and the literary creation that followed. It suggests Atlantis is a layered artifact, part memory, part morality play. The physical cataclysm of Helice provided the dramatic climax. The older, fading memory of places like Tartessos or the Minoans might have provided the sense of a lost golden age. And Plato's own genius wove these threads together with a profound moral lesson, creating a story so resonant that we are still searching for its literal truth 2 millennia later. The ruins of Helice, rediscovered by archaeologists in the late 20th century, buried under coastal sediments, stand as a silent testament. They are not the rings of Atlantis, but they may very well be its beating heart. North of the Strait of Gibraltar, the map of ancient Europe looked nothing like it does today. A vast, fertile plain, rich with forests, rivers, and marshes, stretched from the east coast of Britain all the way to Denmark and the Netherlands. This was not a hidden continent, but a lost landscape known to science as Doggerland. For thousands of years, it was home to thriving communities of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, people who tracked herds of reindeer and aurochs, fished in its winding rivers, and built settlements on its stable ground. Then, as the great ice sheets continued to melt, the sea began its final, relentless advance. Around 6,000 years before the Common Era, a combination of rising waters and a catastrophic underwater landslide off the coast of Norway triggered a devastating tsunami. This final blow submerged the last remaining hills and islands of Doggerland, severing the land bridge between Britain and the continent forever. The North Sea we know was born, covering an area of land twice the size of modern Great Britain. An entire world with all its stories, pathways, and memories vanished beneath the waves. Could the echo of this loss be part of our puzzle? The scale and the suddenness of Doggerland's flooding align with the core dramatic beats of a great flood myth. We are not talking about a few coastal villages here, but the total and irreversible loss of a known world for the people who lived around its edges. For generations afterward, fishermen in the North Sea would occasionally haul up strange artifacts in their nets, antler tools, carved bone, even the tusks of mammoths, tangible ghosts from a sunken country. These finds tell us that the memory of the land and its people persisted in folk tradition. But could such a memory, born in the cold waters of northern Europe, possibly have traveled the thousands of miles to reach the sun-baked priests of Egypt? The idea is not as far-fetched as it sounds. The Neolithic world was connected by long-distance trade routes that moved goods like amber from the Baltic, flint from northern France and shells from the Mediterranean. Stories are the most portable cargo of all, hitching rides with traders, travelers, and migrants. A tale of a great plain swallowed by the angry sea could easily have been a compelling story told around fires for centuries, slowly migrating southward along the river systems of Europe. With each retelling, the specifics might shift, the names of tribes forgotten, the local geography blurred, but the essential, terrifying truth remained: the water rose and the land was gone. By the time such a story reached the Mediterranean, it would have been ancient, stripped of its northern particulars, and ready to be absorbed into a grander narrative. An Egyptian priest, hearing a traveler's account of a distant land lost to the ocean, might have filed it away with other tales of primordial catastrophes. When Solon came asking about the oldest stories of war and destruction, this memory of a drowned world, now thousands of years old, could have been woven together with other fragments, perhaps tales of the Minoan collapse or the seismic destruction of a city like Helike, to form a single, epic history of a fallen empire. The people of Doggerland were not a bronze-wielding civilization with grand temples. They were hunter-gatherers living in a Stone Age world, yet their societal complexity should not be underestimated. Recent archaeological evidence from submerged sites suggests they had seasonal settlements, sophisticated toolmaking, and even ritual practices. Their world was rich and known, and its loss was absolute. This theory asks us to consider that the seed of the Atlantis legend may not be a single advanced culture, but the universal human experience of catastrophic displacement. The story is not about the fall of a mighty empire, but about the drowning of a homeland. It is a narrative that would have been understood by any coastal community that watched the shoreline change, any river-valley culture that saw their fields flood. Doggerland provides a profound and deeply human substrate for the myth. It grounds the epic in a shared geological reality that affected countless generations. The water that filled the North Sea did not just create a new map. It may have given birth to an old story that we are still trying to find on a map of our own. The story of a homeland swallowed by the sea finds a haunting echo far to the south, on the sun-bleached limestone islands of Malta. Here, rising from the rocky ground, stand the oldest free-standing stone structures on Earth. The temples of Jiwith, above Gantaja and Haga Kim, were built over 1,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza. Their massive megalithic blocks fitted together with a precision that defies their age. This was a temple culture of profound sophistication, one that flourished for centuries and then, around 2,500 years before the Common Era, vanished without explanation. The people left behind no written records, no signs of invasion, and no clear reason for their disappearance. They simply stopped building and their islands fell silent. This eerie vacuum has drawn the gaze of Atlantis seekers, who see in Malta's ancient glory and sudden silence a potential fragment of the greater puzzle. The geographical argument for Malta as a remnant of Atlantis hinges on its position. Located in the central Mediterranean, south of Sicily, it sits like a stepping stone between Europe and Africa. Some theorists propose that Malta is not the main island of Atlantis, but a surviving mountaintop of a much larger landmass that sank, leaving only its highest points above water. They point to the island's dramatic cliffs and underwater cart ruts that seem to vanish into the deep as evidence of a lost coastal plain. Even more compelling are the legends woven into Maltese folklore itself. Local tradition speaks of a once great land named Atl or Atlas that was connected to Malta before it was lost to a great flood. This name, so tantalizingly close to Atlantis and the memory of a cataclysm, suggests a deep cultural memory of a drowned world. The physical evidence on the islands is also dramatic. Geologists have documented signs of massive, catastrophic erosion across Malta's landscape, consistent with a tremendous tsunami or a series of powerful seismic events that could have scoured the islands and devastated their population. The temple builders' society, dependent on agriculture and trade, would have been exquisitely vulnerable to such a disaster. A single, terrible event could have broken their civilization, leaving only the silent, stoic temples as witnesses. Yet, for all these resonant clues, the Maltese theory stumbles on the same fundamental hurdle as others. Plato's own words: he placed Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Heracles in the Atlantic Ocean. Malta is firmly inside the Mediterranean, a sea well known to ancient Greek sailors. It was not a mysterious land beyond the known world, but a documented part of it. Furthermore, while the temples are awe-inspiring, they are the remains of a religious culture, not the sprawling, militaristic empire with a vast navy and a war with Athens that Plato described. Malta offers a powerful template for a lost, advanced culture that met a mysterious end, a template that could have been absorbed into the growing legend. Perhaps the story of the temple builders' collapse traveled across the sea, becoming another thread in the tapestry. Their silent stones remind us that long before empires rose and fell, humanity was capable of creating wonders, and those wonders could be abandoned to time by forces we are still struggling to understand. Across the world, a different sunken shelf tells an equally dramatic story. Southeast Asia holds a secret beneath its warm, shallow seas, a theory that reimagines the entire Atlantis legend with an audacious geographical leap. This is the Sunderland hypothesis, championed by figures like the Brazilian professor Auricio Santos. It proposes that the true location of Plato's lost civilization was not in the Atlantic at all, but on the Sunda Shelf, the massive continental shelf now submerged beneath the Java Sea, the South China Sea, and the Malacca Strait. During the last ice age, when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, this was not a scattering of islands. It was a continuous, continent-sized landmass, easily as large as India, connecting the modern islands of Java, Sumatra, Borneo, and the Malay Peninsula. Here, proponents argue, is the island larger than Libya and Asia combined that Plato described, but located halfway across the globe from where we have been searching. The environmental picture painted is compelling. Sunderland was a tropical paradise, incredibly fertile and biodiverse, fed by volcanic soil from the Ring of Fire, a perfect setting for a sophisticated agricultural society to flourish. The region's intense volcanic and seismic activity also provides a ready-made cataclysmic mechanism. A series of massive eruptions, perhaps coupled with the rapid sea level rise as the Ice Age ended, could have shattered this low-lying plain, flooding it in stages and forcing its population to disperse in a great diaspora. Professor Santos and others point to the advanced ancient cultures that later emerged on the fringes of this sunken world, like the incredible temple complex of Angkor Wat or the sophisticated maritime kingdoms of Indonesia, as possible inheritors of that lost knowledge. The theory suggests these are not independent developments, but the cultural legacy of a drowned mother civilization whose survivors seeded new beginnings on the surrounding highlands. This idea solves several nagging problems with the Atlantic location. It provides a truly continent-sized land that did indeed sink, not just an island. It places Atlantis in a geologically active zone capable of producing the violent end Plato described, and it anchors the story in a region with a proven, deep history of human innovation and complex society. Yet the Sunderland theory faces its own profound, perhaps insurmountable, hurdle: the immense gap of space and culture. How could a detailed story about a civilization lost in Southeast Asia over 11,000 years ago find its way intact to Egyptian priests and then to Plato? The ancient Mediterranean world had limited, if any, direct contact with Southeast Asia. The Silk Road was not yet established, and the vast Indian Ocean was a formidable barrier. The theory requires a chain of cultural transmission stretching across thousands of miles and countless intermediary cultures, with the story maintaining its core details about concentric cities, a war with Athens, and a location beyond the Pillars of Heracles. Proponents argue that the story could have traveled with the migrating survivors themselves, moving westward over generations, but this stretches plausibility thin. It asks us to believe that a specific narrative from prehistoric Indonesia survived intact through millennia of retelling in completely unrelated languages and cultures, only to resurface perfectly in 4th century BC Greece. Furthermore, while the sinking of Sunderland is a geological fact, no archaeological evidence has been found on that submerged seafloor to indicate a complex Bronze Age empire. The land was likely inhabited by hunter-gatherer and early agricultural groups, but nothing matching the imperial grandeur of Plato's Atlantis. The Sunderland theory is a breathtaking reminder of our planet's lost geography, a real-world map change of epic proportions. It shows that cataclysmic flooding and the dispersal of populations are not just Mediterranean or Atlantic stories, but global human experiences. Yet, it may reveal more about our universal tendency to mythologize lost homelands than it does about a specific lost city. Every region with a drowned continental shelf, from the North Sea to the Java Sea, could theoretically claim to be the inspiration for Atlantis. This proliferation of candidates itself tells us something vital. The deep human memory of land lost to rising water is a story we have told in different forms all over the world. West of the Moroccan coast, a chain of volcanic peaks rises from the deep Atlantic. These are the Canary Islands, a place of dramatic black sand beaches, lush forests, and a history as isolated as any on Earth. Their indigenous people, the Guanches, lived in complete separation from the rest of humanity from prehistoric times until Spanish conquest in the 15th century. They were a Neolithic culture, yet their origins and some of their achievements have fueled a provocative idea. Could these islanders be the last living descendants of the Atlanteans, survivors clinging to the mountaintops of a drowned continent? The geography is undeniably suggestive. The islands sit on a massive underwater plateau, a sunken shelf that hints at a formerly larger landmass. They are positioned directly west of the Pillars of Heracles, fitting the classic Atlantic location. They are violently volcanic, born from the same tectonic forces that could have caused catastrophic land subsidence. The Guanches themselves were a tall, fair-skinned, and light-haired people, a physical description that stood in stark contrast to the North African Berbers just across the water. Their own legends spoke of a homeland across the sea, a place they called Atlantis or Atalaya, from which their ancestors came before a great cataclysm. When the Spanish arrived, they found a society with complex social structures, intricate mummification practices rivaling those of Egypt, and a mysterious form of whistled language used to communicate across deep ravines. But the most tangible clues are the silent stone puzzles left on the islands. On Tenerife, at a site called Guatemala, stand a series of step pyramids constructed from lava stone without mortar. Their precise astronomical alignment, particularly to the summer solstice sunrise, suggests a sophisticated understanding of the skies. While some archaeologists argue these could be relatively modern agricultural terraces, their deliberate design and ceremonial feel have led others to wonder. Could these structures be a cultural fingerprint, an architectural style carried from a much older, lost civilization? The theory proposes a haunting scenario. Imagine a vast Atlantic island, the heart of Plato's empire, beginning to fracture and sink. The terrified population flees to the highest ground, the volcanic peaks that would become the Canary Islands. Cut off from the drowning lowlands, they regress over millennia, losing the technologies of their parent culture but retaining core traditions, mummification, pyramid building, and the sacred story of the land that vanished beneath the waves. Their physical isolation preserved them, and their legends like a time capsule. It is a narrative of tragic survival, of a people becoming a living fossil of a greater past. Yet, science offers a more grounded, though no less fascinating, explanation. Genetic studies of ancient Guanche remains show they were most closely related to North African Berber populations, likely arriving by boat in waves of migration perhaps 3,000 years ago. Their physical traits, while distinctive, fall within North African variation. The pyramids at Guama, while enigmatic, lack any artifacts that would date them to a prehistoric Atlantic civilization. Their construction may indeed be from the 19th century. The legend of a lost homeland could simply reflect a very real but forgotten migration across the sea from the African coast, a story that grew more mythic with each passing generation on their isolated islands. So, do the Guanches hold the key to Atlantis? They likely do not represent a direct, unbroken lineage from a Bronze Age superpower, but they do represent something equally powerful in our search: the human capacity for myth-making in the face of geographical mystery. Living on islands that feel like the tips of a submerged world surrounded by an endless ocean, it is only natural that a people would craft an origin story that explains their uniqueness and their separation. The Canary Islands are not the sunken capital, but they are a perfect mirror. They show us how a real, isolated culture can develop legends that, to an outside observer, look tantalizingly like echoes of a greater truth. They remind us that sometimes the search for Atlantis tells us less about a lost city and more about the stories we tell to explain our own lonely places in the world. The search for Atlantis is a story written in echoes, but sometimes a single echo rings with such clarity it feels like a shout. In the first years of the 21st century, a researcher named Robert Sarmast believed he had heard that shout from the depths of the Mediterranean just off the coast of Cyprus. His quest began not with a shovel but with sound. Using advanced sonar mapping technology, Sarmast and his team surveyed a submerged plateau southeast of the island, a place where the seafloor drops away into the abyss. What the sonar images revealed, he argued, were not random hills and valleys. He pointed to long, straight lines intersecting at perfect right angles, formations that looked uncannily like the foundations of walls. He identified what appeared to be a rectangular enclosure, a possible temple platform, and even the ghostly outline of a canal cutting across the landscape. To Sarmast, this was the blueprint of a sunken city, and he boldly declared it to be the true location of Atlantis finally found. The announcement created a media sensation. Here was a modern explorer using cutting-edge technology to seemingly vindicate an ancient tale. It felt like a triumph of the new over the old, a moment when myth was about to be dragged into the light by science. Sarmast's expedition captured the public imagination because it offered something tangible: a map, a set of coordinates, a visual pattern that anyone could look at and see a city. It promised a definitive answer, a closure to the mystery that had eluded us for millennia. The idea that Atlantis might lie off Cyprus was not entirely without precedent. The island sits at a strategic crossroads of ancient civilizations and has its own rich history of seismic activity and coastal changes. For a moment, it seemed the search might be over, but science at its best is a process of relentless verification. The initial excitement soon met the rigorous scrutiny of the broader scientific community. Marine geologists and oceanographers examined the same sonar data, and they reached a very different conclusion. The long, straight lines Sarmast identified as walls were, they argued, classic examples of natural geological features. The underwater landscape off Cyprus is shaped by powerful tectonic forces, where the African plate grinds against the Eurasian plate. This creates fault lines, fractures in the Earth's crust that often appear as remarkably straight ridges or cliffs on sonar. The rectangular shapes could be explained by the intersection of these fault systems. What looked like a canal was likely a submerged river channel, carved by freshwater flow when sea levels were lower during the last ice age. The temple platform was a flat-topped seamount, a common feature of volcanic or erosional origin. In essence, the scientists saw the same picture, but their trained eyes recognized the brushstrokes of geology, not architecture. This episode stands as a crucial case study in the modern hunt for lost worlds. It demonstrates both the power and the peril of our tools. Sophisticated technology like multi-beam sonar allows us to see the seafloor in stunning detail, revealing landscapes we could only dream of a century ago. It fuels our searches by giving us patterns to interpret. Yet, this very power carries a risk, the risk of pareidolia, that innate human tendency to see meaningful shapes in random patterns. We look at clouds and sea dragons, we look at sonar maps and see city grids. The Cyprus findings highlight the indispensable importance of peer-reviewed verification in underwater archaeology. A compelling image is not proof. Proof requires multiple lines of evidence, core samples from the seafloor to analyze sediment and date any potential human activity, direct observation with submersibles or remotely operated vehicles to examine the texture and composition of the walls, and the consensus of experts from various fields who can rule out natural processes. Sarmast's claims, while passionately held, did not pass this multidisciplinary test. The story of the Cyprus sonar maps is not a tale of failure, but a lesson in humility. It shows how the desire to find can sometimes outpace the discipline required to verify. Yet, it also reaffirms a beautiful truth about our relationship with the past. We are driven to look, to map, to interpret. Every time a new technology emerges, we turn its lens on our oldest mysteries, hoping to see them anew. The search continues, not because we are gullible, but because we are curious. And with each investigation, whether it ends in a discovered city or a explained geology, we learn a little more, not just about a possible lost island, but about the enduring power of a story to make us explore the hidden contours of our own world. The relentless hunt for a sunken city may be missing the point entirely. After all, this story comes to us not from a sailor's logbook, but from the pen of one of history's greatest philosophers. For a significant number of scholars, the true location of Atlantis is not beneath the sea, but within the pages of Plato's dialogues. It is a philosophical allegory, a powerful thought experiment crafted to teach a profound lesson about power, morality, and the fate of nations. To understand this, we must step back from sonar maps and geological cores and into the intellectual world of ancient Athens. Plato was deeply concerned with the nature of the ideal state. In his most famous work, The Republic, he outlines a vision of a perfectly ordered society governed by philosopher kings, where justice, wisdom, and moderation reign supreme. This was his blueprint for utopia, but what happens when a society deviates from that ideal? What does its downfall look like? This is where Atlantis enters the stage. In his later dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, Plato paints a picture of a magnificent civilization that embodies the opposite of his republic. Atlantis begins with noble origins founded by the god Poseidon himself. Its early kings are wise and just, living in harmony with the divine laws. But over generations, a fatal change occurs. The divine portion within them, as Plato writes, becomes diluted and weakened by repeated mixing with mortal stock. They succumb to hubris, that dangerous pride which the Greeks believed inevitably attracted the wrath of the gods. Their virtue erodes, replaced by greed, ambition, and a lust for power. They cease to be philosopher kings and become tyrants, launching an unprovoked war of conquest against the peaceful nations of the Mediterranean, including a prehistoric, idealized version of Athens. This is the crucial pivot. Atlantis is not destroyed because of a random earthquake. It is punished. The gods, seeing that this once great people had become corrupt and filled with unjust ambition, decide to cleanse the earth of them. The cataclysm is a divine judgment. The sea does not simply swallow an island, it executes a sentence. In this light, the entire narrative serves as a cautionary tale for Plato's fellow Athenians. During his lifetime, Athens had experienced the heights of imperial power and the depths of catastrophic defeat in the Peloponnesian War, a conflict many saw as a result of Athenian hubris and moral decay. Plato watched his own city struggle with corruption, political instability, and the erosion of traditional values. The story of Atlantis, then, is a stark warning. It says, look at this glorious empire that fell from grace. See how its technological marvels and military might meant nothing once its soul became corrupted. Your wealth, your navy, your walls will not save you if you lose your virtue. The true enemy is not the sea, but the decay within. This interpretation transforms the search from an archaeological puzzle into a moral one. The concentric rings of the city are not just an architectural plan. They can be seen as a symbol of that insular, prideful isolation that comes with power. The walls a civilization builds between itself and humility. The mysterious metal orichalcum loses its luster, becoming a symbol of tarnished wealth and misplaced values. Even the specific date, 9,000 years before Solon, serves a purpose. It places the story in a mythic, primordial past, giving it the weight of eternal truth, a lesson from the dawn of time itself. So, was Atlantis ever a real place on a map? For proponents of this view, the answer is irrelevant. Its reality is philosophical. Plato was a master storyteller who knew that a gripping tale about a lost world would be far more memorable than a dry lecture on political ethics. He wrapped his lesson in the irresistible packaging of mystery and catastrophe to ensure it would be discussed, debated, and remembered for millennia. And in that, he succeeded beyond any ancient writer's wildest dreams. We are still debating it today, not just as a geographical mystery, but as a timeless story about what happens when a civilization forgets what made it great. The allegory asks each generation a haunting question. Are we building a republic, or are we, brick by proud brick, constructing our own Atlantis? The allegory Plato crafted for ancient Athens refused to stay buried in philosophical texts. It re-emerged with volcanic force in the modern era, not from the sea but from the printing press. In 1882, a former American congressman named Ignatius Donnelly published a book titled Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. This was not a dry academic treatise. It was a sensational, sweeping manifesto that launched Atlantis into the heart of the popular imagination. Donnelly argued that Plato's story was literal historical fact. He proposed that Atlantis was the true mother civilization, the source of all ancient wisdom, technology, and mythology. When it sank, he claimed, its refugees seeded cultures across the globe, explaining the similarities between pyramids in Egypt and the Americas, or flood myths found on every continent. Donnelly's work was a masterpiece of speculative synthesis, mixing archaeology, linguistics, and comparative religion into a compelling, if scientifically dubious, package. It gave the legend a new kind of authority, a pseudo-scholarly foundation that made it feel investigible, real, and tantalizingly close to being proven. This book single-handedly transformed Atlantis from a philosophical parable into a modern mystery, igniting a century of obsession. From this spark, the myth fragmented and evolved, adapting itself to the fears and fantasies of the 20th century. It was drafted into the service of nationalism, with some groups claiming their people were the direct descendants of the Atlantean elite, providing a mythic justification for racial ideologies. It was absorbed into occult and esoteric traditions, where Atlantis became a lost age of high spiritual wisdom and psychic power, its secrets preserved by secret societies waiting for the right moment to return. But perhaps its most enduring and visible rebirth was in the realm of mass entertainment. The Lost City proved to be the perfect narrative engine. It offered a guaranteed recipe for adventure, a hidden map, a perilous journey, a forgotten world filled with both wonder and danger. This template powered countless pulp novels, comic books, and Saturday morning serials. Hollywood eagerly embraced this blueprint. The legend provided a magnificent setting for spectacle. We saw it in films like Disney's animated epic Atlantis, The Lost Empire. Here, the city is reimagined not as a sinking ruin, but as a living, breathing society powered by a mysterious energy source, a crystal of immense power. The story follows classic adventure beats a quirky crew of explorers, a hidden journal, a race against rivals. But at its heart, it retains Plato's core idea, a technologically advanced civilization that suffered a great cataclysm and withdrew from the world. The film translates the philosophical lost empire into a visual feast of Art Deco spires and glowing reactors, making the myth accessible to a new generation. Even more iconic is the treatment in the Indiana Jones franchise. In Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, a video game, and through echoes in the films, the legend is treated as the ultimate archaeological prize. It becomes a puzzle box of clues scattered across the globe, a chase for a power source that could change the world. This version leans into the occult and Nazi obsession angle, showing how the myth can be weaponized. The Nazis seek Atlantis not for knowledge but for a weapon, perverting the ancient wisdom for conquest. Indiana Jones, the skeptic adventurer, is forced to confront the possibility that the story might be real and that its power must be kept from malevolent hands. This framing perfectly captures the modern tension around the legend. Is it a historical truth to be uncovered, or a dangerous fantasy that should perhaps be left buried? These adaptations, from Donnelly's book to blockbuster films, reveal something fundamental. The specific details of Plato's rings and canals matter less than the powerful archetypes the story provides. Atlantis is the ultimate MacGuffin, the perfect lost world. It allows storytellers to explore themes of hubris and responsibility, to stage clashes between wonder and greed, and to ask what we might be capable of if we rediscovered a forgotten part of ourselves. The city may never be found on any ocean floor, but it has built an unshakable empire in our collective dreams, a template for mystery that feels perpetually one discovery away. This magnetic pull toward the fantastic, however, has a dangerous shadow. For every serious researcher examining sonar data, there is a chorus of voices claiming definitive proof, often by bending facts to fit a predetermined narrative. This is the world of pseudo-archaeology, where the rigorous scientific method is abandoned in favor of a compelling story. It operates on a simple, seductive formula. Start with a sensational conclusion, Atlantis has been found, and then selectively gather only the evidence that appears to support it, while ignoring or dismissing everything that does not. The sonar lines off Cyprus were not presented as a curious geological feature requiring further study. They were declared the walls of Poseidon's temple. The natural bicroc at Bimini was not analyzed as a fascinating formation. It was proclaimed a paved road to a lost continent. This approach fundamentally reverses how knowledge is built. Science asks a question and follows the evidence wherever it leads, even if the answer is mundane. Pseudo-archaeology picks the answer first and then goes hunting for evidence, treating coincidence as confirmation. Television specials and internet documentaries have become powerful engines for these claims. They are crafted not as balanced investigations, but as persuasive arguments, often with dramatic music, cryptic narration, and a parade of experts whose credentials are rarely scrutinized. They present a theory as a thrilling revelation, a secret being uncovered just for you, the viewer. The complex, slow, and often frustrating work of real archaeology, the careful digging, the peer-reviewed papers, the debates over pottery fragments is edited out. It is replaced by a cinematic quest where the hero scholar pieces together an ancient map and bravely challenges the hidebound academic establishment. The internet amplifies this effect, creating echo chambers where a single speculative video or blog post can be shared millions of times, stripped of all critical context until it feels like established truth. The emotional appeal is powerful. It feels more exciting to believe that a perfect ring in the desert is a drowned city than to accept it as a beautiful accident of geology. It is more romantic to think the Guanches are the last princes of Atlantis than to understand them as an isolated branch of North African migrants. This is the crucial distinction we must learn to see, the difference between a fascinating hypothesis and an established discovery. A hypothesis is a starting point, a what-if based on an intriguing observation. The Minoan hypothesis is a strong one because it starts with a verified historical cataclysm and looks for cultural echoes. The Richat structure is a fascinating geological what-if that, despite its visual appeal, lacks the archaeological evidence to move beyond speculation. Pseudo-archaeology skips the hypothesis stage entirely. It presents speculation as fact, and in doing so, it does a profound disservice. It erodes public trust in genuine science, framing meticulous researchers as closed-minded skeptics hiding the truth. More dangerously, it often appropriates and distorts the cultural heritage of real peoples, like the Guanches or various indigenous groups, twisting their histories to serve an external fantasy. The lesson here is not to stop wondering or exploring. It is to sharpen our curiosity with critical thinking. When we encounter a new claim about Atlantis, we must ask the simple, grounding questions. What is the source of this evidence? Has it been published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, or only in a self-published book or a sensational documentary? What do experts in relevant fields, geologists, marine archaeologists, linguists have to say about it? Does the theory explain all the data, or does it conveniently overlook contradictory facts? The enduring mystery of Atlantis is a gift because it pushes us to look, to question, and to imagine. But its greatest value may lie in teaching us how to navigate a world flooded with information, to recognize the solid ground of evidence from the shifting sands of a good story. Perhaps the most revealing artifact in this entire search is not a sunken wall or a cryptic map, but the simple, unshakable fact that we are still looking. 2,400 years after Plato wrote his dialogues, we continue to scan ocean floors and debate geological formations, not because the evidence is conclusive, but because the story answers a profound human need. Atlantis endures because it is more than a place, it is a mirror. It reflects our deepest fascinations with catastrophe, with forgotten glory, and with the haunting idea that we are not the first, nor perhaps the greatest. Every culture has its flood myth, its story of a world wiped clean. These are not mere tales of destruction, they are narratives of rebirth, of a moral reset. Atlantis provides a specific, tantalizing stage for that universal drama. It offers a golden age, a time of perfection and advanced knowledge, which we then tragically lost through our own failings. This pattern is incredibly powerful. It allows us to believe that greatness is possible while also explaining why our current world is flawed. We are not inadequate, we are simply living in the dim aftermath of a fallen ideal. This legend becomes a blank canvas and we are the painters. Throughout history, we have projected our own hopes and fears onto its sunken silhouette. In an age of empire, it was a cautionary tale about hubris. In the era of spiritualism, it became a lost continent of psychic wisdom. For modern conspiracists, it is a repository of forbidden technology. Our ideologies, our anxieties about progress, our longing for a simpler, purer past, all of them find a home in the empty streets of that drowned city. This is why the theory changes with the times. The Minoan hypothesis resonated with an archaeological age uncovering tangible pasts. The Richat theory thrives in an era of satellite imagery, where we can see patterns from space that ancient storytellers could not. Our tools evolve, but the quest remains. The search for Atlantis is kin to our fascination with other enduring mysteries. The purpose of Stonehenge, the fate of the Roanoke colony, the whispers of a Yeti in the mountains. These are not puzzles we necessarily expect to solve with finality. They are conversations we have with the unknown, a way of exploring the edges of our understanding. The moment a mystery is definitively solved, it moves from the realm of legend into the filing cabinet of history. It loses its magic, the unproven, the tantalizingly possible. That is where imagination lives. So we return generation after generation to the same ancient text, the same ocean basins, not for a destination, but for the journey itself. The real treasure of Atlantis is not a chest of orichalcum at the bottom of the sea. It is the questions the story forces us to ask about our own civilization. What would we save if the waters rose? What legacies would we leave behind in the silt? And what stories would survivors tell about us millennia from now, when our cities are just echoes in the stone? Perhaps the truth of Atlantis is not a single sunken island, but a mosaic of shattered memories. After this journey across oceans and through time, a compelling possibility emerges. What if we stopped searching for one place that fits every detail, and instead listened to the legend as a symphony of echoes, each movement contributed by a different real-world event? The power of Plato's story may lie in its composite nature, a brilliant synthesis of geography, catastrophe, and philosophy. Let us attempt a final reconstruction, not of a city, but of a story's birth. The geographical frame, the very stage, likely came from the edge of the known world. For an Athenian like Plato, that meant the region beyond the Pillars of Heracles. This was not an empty concept, it was a place of real mystery and reported wealth. The kingdom of Tartessos in southern Spain, a fabulously rich trading power that vanished just centuries before Plato's lifetime, perfectly fits this role. Its location, its advanced metallurgy hinting at orichalcum, its sudden fade from history, all of this provided a tantalizing, contemporary template for a lost civilization at the world's western limit. The story needed a setting, and Tartessos supplied a credible one. Next, the cataclysm. A legend of a drowned civilization requires a drowning. Here, the Mediterranean offered not one, but several horrific examples. The monumental eruption of Sahara and the tsunami that crippled the Minoan Empire would have been a searing memory in regional lore, a tale of a great seafaring culture brought low by the sea and fire. But for a more immediate, visceral shock, there was Helike, the complete submergence of a prosperous Greek city, sacred to Poseidon, in a single night during Plato's own adulthood, must have been a profound trauma. It demonstrated that the gods could and would erase a proud city from the map as punishment. This event gave the philosophical allegory its terrifying, believable climax. Finally, the moral core, the soul of the story, came from Plato himself. He was a philosopher, not a historian. His life's work was examining justice, virtue, and the ideal state. The tale of a magnificent empire that grew corrupt, arrogant, and warlike, only to be obliterated by divine judgment, is the ultimate cautionary tale. He took the real-world frame of a lost Western kingdom and the real-world horror of a sunken city, and he fused them into a timeless lesson about hubris. The staggering date of 9,000 years placed it beyond verification, in the realm of mythic truth. The concentric rings of the city may have been inspired by natural formations like the Richat structure, or by idealized city planning, serving as a symbol of insular, doomed perfection. In this composite view, Atlantis is not a lie but a layered truth. It is a palimpsest where one real story was written over another and then overlaid with a philosophical message. The refugees from the Black Sea flood carried stories of a drowning world. The Egyptians recorded the collapse of Minoan trade. The Greeks witnessed the fall of Helike. All these fragments of disaster swirled in the cultural memory. When Plato sought a narrative to warn Athens about its own imperial overreach, he reached for these fragments. He built his allegory not from thin air, but from the most powerful raw materials his world possessed: recent history, ancient cataclysm, and the awe of distant lands. This synthesis does not rob the legend of its magic, it deepens it. It means that Atlantis is, in a very real sense, all around us. It is in the ash layer on Santorini, in the submerged ruins of Helike, in the golden artifacts of Tartessian tombs, and in the universal human fear of the rising wave. We have been looking for a pin on a map when we should have been listening to an echo in a canyon, built from many voices across time. the city may never be found because it was never a single city. It was a story waiting to be told, assembled from the broken pieces of our own past. This epic journey has taken us from the sunken calderas of the Aegean to the frozen deserts of Antarctica, from the geometric wonder of the Sahara to the sonar shadows of the Mediterranean. We have sailed with Minoan traders, walked with Guanche survivors, and deciphered the warnings of a philosopher. Yet after all this, no single map coordinates emerge from the deep. No theory holds the irrefutable final proof, and perhaps that is the point. Each compelling idea, the Minoan cataclysm, the Richat's rings, the drowned shelf of Doggerland, is not a dead end but a fascinating piece of a mosaic. They are echoes of real events, landscapes, and lost kingdoms that our collective memory has woven together over millennia. The true location of Atlantis, then, may not be a physical point on the ocean floor. It exists in the profound intersection where hard geology meets fragile history, and where human imagination rushes in to fill the gaps. It is a story built from our deepest fears of catastrophe and our highest hopes for lost golden ages. So now we turn the question to you. After hearing the evidence, which theory resonates most? Was it a city swallowed by a volcanic wave, a kingdom claimed by desert sands, or a continent shifted by polar ice? Cast your vote in the poll and tell us in the comments. Share your own favorite lesser-known candidate or a piece of the puzzle we might have missed. The search continues, not just in the field but in the conversation. The legend lives on through every new idea, every shared speculation, and every curious mind that looks at a map and